ASEAN Breakfast Call Dialogue, widening your horizons.
Hey, this is Arlene.
Hi, this is Grace.
And we are at our third segment of the ASEAN Breakfast Call, which is at our ABC Dialogue. Today we have a guest all the way from Australia. Her name is Susan Price, and she is from the Socialist Alliance in Australia. Welcome. Thanks for joining our discussion today.
Hi, Arlene and Grace. Thanks very much for inviting me on your show.
And today we are going to talk about a topic that a lot of capitalists might not be comfortable talking about, which is about socialism. We are going to focus more on resistance against the 21st century capitalism. So you are part of the Socialist Alliance. Probably a bit of background about yourself and the party and how it fits into Australia's political landscape.
Sure, thank you. Well, I've been a social activist myself for around 25 years. I started out as an activist in the women's movement, also the peace movement during the period of the early 1990s, and got involved quite quickly in campaigns for environmental protection in Australia, and as a working person got involved in my union, and I suppose that's probably been one of my main areas of struggle and activity has been in the labour movement, but also recently in the campaign for the rights of refugees, which, as possibly some of your listeners may be aware, this is a big issue in Australia today. Mm-hmm. I'm a member of a union in the university sector, in the National Tertiary Education Union, and I'm actually a founding member of our party, Socialist Alliance. I guess for those of your listeners who aren't familiar with us, we're a far-left party. We're the largest such party on the left in Australia, and we were launched back in 2001 initially as an alliance between a number of groups and independent activists who wanted to build a new political alternative. People who were quite disillusioned with the experience of the Labor Party in government, and who also were sympathetic to the left and welcomed the idea of a new political formation being launched at that time.
Was the leftist force very strong prior to 2000?
Well, really, the left in Australia is small. As it is in a lot of places. We're all, when you look at the size of our population in Australia, well over 20 million people, the left is quite small. But as a combined force, it has the capacity to actually, punch above its weight. And so this was really an opportunity back in 2001 for us to join together and to build a new far left party that people were attracted to joining, and that was really the beginnings of the Socialist Alliance.
What were the main concern or frustration during the early 2000s, where you guys started to realize that maybe, hey, you should have a political force that is ideologically left?
Similarly to the rest of the world, Australia suffered the consequences of neoliberalism, and a lot of the progressive, reforms that were possible, even for social democratic parties such as the Labor Party in Australia during the 70s, really started to unwind throughout the 1980s as neoliberalism took its hold as an ideology. And what a lot of people in Australia found, was that the party, that they'd considered to be that representing workers in Australia, that, the Australian Labor Party was really, becoming more and more a slave to neoliberalism and winding back a lot of the gains, not just of the workers' movement, but also of the social movements more generally. So we saw, attacks on free education, attacks on universal healthcare, move to a more user pay system in our social programs, social welfare programs. And I think people, are genuinely still looking for a political representation that actually meets their needs. And I guess Socialist Alliance, when it first began, one of its early campaigns was a united electoral front to contest the elections that were happening across the country against the party in government at that time, which was actually the Liberal National Party of John Howard.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really its beginnings.
I'm actually on your website now. One of your tagline is for billions, not billionaires. And as far as I know, you have one of the richest billionaire or woman billionaire in the world, Gina Reinhardt. And
that's right.
So in Australia, is there a disparity in terms of inequality between the very rich and the ordinary Australians?
Yes, there is. I mean, that gap is widening. The fact that we're now home to the richest woman in the world tells you something, and also the fact that she is a mining magnate tells you a little bit about the way that the Australian economy has been distorted by the resources sector. So while economic figures may show boom times for the mining companies, the reality for more and more a growing number of Australians today is that the gap between rich and poor is growing. Concentration of wealth is more and more in the hands of a few, and the share of wealth that belongs to working people as compared to the wealthy or the profit sector now is at rates that it was back in the 1960s. So working people have really gone backwards to a great degree.
In the context of Australia, why the rich can be very, very rich, are the policies, the current government policies, protecting them more than protecting the ordinary citizens?
Well, yes, they are. It's an interesting time for us because now really with the way the world market for minerals and gas is going, there are actually dangers that the boom times will end. And in fact, already we've found that the jobs growth in the mining sector has slowed down because of all the construction of new mines is now almost completed, and now those mines are just going into operation, which is not actually a source of job creation by and large. So now we're more and more reliant, if you like, on the ability to export gas and other and minerals and fossil fuels to the rest of the world. And of course that market does depend on countries such as China actually continuing their own economic growth and demand for Australian raw materials. So while it has been boom times over the recent period, there's no guarantee that will continue to be the case. So there's a lot of working people in Australia who are very dependent on that economy, who are actually living very precariously, and the balance could tip in in another direction very, very easily if commodity prices fell or demand for raw materials fell, etc.
But what is the difference between the Socialist Party and the rest of the opposition parties?
Well, what can I say? I guess, our slogan for the billions, not the billionaires, does kind of tell you something about what we stand for. Our other catchcry is that we stand for people and the planet before profit. So I guess whereas most of the mainstream political parties in Australia are basically operating within a capitalist framework, that is, they will fight for various progressive reforms, and certainly there are parties such as the Green Party who will put forward progressive platforms for the environment, for the rights of refugees, even for the rights of workers, but within the confines of a private profit capitalist system. Whereas I guess for us, while we do participate in elections and we want to grow the support for socialism and for socialist parties like ourselves, we are fundamentally about a democratic society that's run by and for working people. So an alternative to the destructive sort of capitalist system that we're living in right now. And given the level of environmental threat to environmental sustainability and the future of our planet, actually this kind of system is not just desirable, but actually necessary. Necessary not just for today, but for tomorrow.
I'm curious to know about the kind of issues that the Socialist Alliance would fight for in Australia. I know migrant workers or immigration is one of the key issues, but what are other issues related?
Well, we have a large policy platform, and a lot of our energy is spent fighting for progressive reforms and also defending the gains that have been won by workers and the social movements in the past. So, for example, we fight for the rights of workers to maintain their wage income in comparison to the cost of living, and against the attempts by the government to wind back conditions such as holiday penalty rates, which they're trying to do right now, or to lower the minimum wage, which also sections of the Australian business class are very interested in doing. We also campaign for the rights of women, so for women's reproductive rights, for example, also for an end to violence against women. So we do fight on a number of fronts, and of course for Australia to be a more humane and open society when it comes to accepting refugees, and also to expand and protect civil liberties and the rights of people to call their government to account for its policies. Mm-hmm. We have a broad range of policies on a number of issues, including taxation, superannuation, the privatisation of social services and the need for those services to be in public hands, for example. It was one of our key platforms that we took to the last federal election in Australia.
Let's go back to history. When it comes to modern socialism that is being promoted and being practiced in today's modern world, is it really very different ideologically from the socialism that was being utilized during the Cold War and the Soviet era?
Well, I think it is, because obviously the impact of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, I guess it was sort of contradictory in a sense. On the one hand, it spelt the end of, or an ability to, if you like, move beyond conceptions of socialism that equated with bureaucratic socialism. Not to say that happened straight away. It was actually a very difficult period for a lot of socialists around the world at that time, because of the legacy of Stalinism and bureaucratized socialism and the lack of democracy in the Soviet Union. But at the same time, the contradictions of capitalism hadn't been resolved by that collapse either. And although you had, people like Francis Fukuyama saying, this is the end of history, that somehow or other capitalism, emerged triumphantly from that period, were also found to be incorrect. And of course, as we know, that the history for the millions of the world's people since the end of the Cold War has been more misery, more poverty, more environmental destruction, and sadly more wars. So capitalism hasn't been able to resolve those issues, those problems that the world faces. So now, really, what we're starting to see, and I think what is now flourishing in many parts of the world or in particular parts of the world, is a new definition, a new creation of socialism that is democratic socialism, a people's power socialism that's rooted in indigenous Indigenous views and practices, and that is really learnt from, I guess, the mistakes and errors of the Soviet era. Mm-hmm. And that I think is, is quite exciting actually for prospects for actually turning things around for the majority of the world's people.
Mm-hmm. You seem to sum up that the socialism that is being given a new breath is a socialism that is based on a pro-people and pro-democracy ideology. But what about business?
Well, do you mean what about business under socialism?
Yes.
Well, I guess that's an interesting question. I mean, clearly the process of making change is a process, right? And where you have changes happen in particular countries that are, still exist within a globalized capitalist economy, they're certainly, when we talk about political and social upheavals that have happened, and that's not necessarily the same as saying that we've resolved the economic contradictions or realities of capitalism. So, but I think ultimately humanity is only going to survive, and the planet is only going to survive if we can actually move beyond a market-driven economic model. Without, because I think, to date, the market has not been able to resolve the question of feeding the world, eradicating poverty.
So you're saying that we should completely do away with the idea of free market and the idea of even having businesses or private practices?
No, I don't agree we should do away with business or private trade necessarily. Actually, I think it is necessary for us to actually develop ideas about how we want our society to be based on realities and not just on abstract ideas. So the process of actually building socialism, is not something that happens overnight. And I think it's while I do strongly believe that the free market capitalist economy is actually heading our globe towards a cliff in terms of its survival and the survival of our species. So I do think it is fundamentally counterposed to a sustainable and safe climate, to a fair distribution of wealth amongst peoples, to a world that is free of war. How things actually, the process by which economic and social changes come about. I think we can't determine that today. I think that's something that's got to be worked out by people as the process unfolds.
But do you think a lot of the things that you mentioned are very idealistic, in the sense that probably everyone would aspire for it, not necessarily if you're a socialist, but in reality, it might not be as easy or as idealistic as the ideology would allow to. I mean, in the past, we see how the contest between socialism and capitalism has created this Cold War that eventually ended up people suffering more.
Well, yes. I mean, I would hope that people would aspire to these sorts of things. not necessarily, they may not necessarily call themselves socialist, and that I think that is fine. I mean, one of the things that the Occupy movement demonstrated was that even just that call to action to occupy Wall Street resonated with so many people across the world who knew that there was a problem, who took a view that was anti-capitalist. And, really did latch on and sign up to the idea that another world is possible. And I think that's a really positive thing. And I know a lot of those people would certainly not consider themselves today to be socialist, but they are part of our movement nonetheless, part of that movement for another better world that we know is necessary. But the process of actually building socialism, the process of change, even which is going on in Latin America today, there is still, if you like, a battle of ideas and a battle for power, if you like, going on in those societies between people, I guess, people having aspirations to take more control over the decisions that are being made in their society, and the traditional power bases, which still are very much strongly rest with the corporate sector, the ruling elites, and the vestiges of the old societies that exist in those countries. So it is a dynamic. It's a dynamic that's there that plays out in different ways in different places. But I guess ultimately has to be resolved somehow. But but in a country like Venezuela today, for example, which has adopted, the majority of people have voted again and again that they want to move towards a socialist society. There's still private enterprise in Venezuela today. There's still private markets, but more and more, I guess the social sectors, the public sectors, are starting to be able to deliver what those private sectors were formerly able to deliver. So it's it is a dynamic process actually. So and it can't just be it's something that people have to want, and then they have to have the means, the democratic means, to be able to create for themselves.
So we will take a short break. When we return, we will talk more about threats of capitalism and neoliberalism in this century.
ASEAN Breakfast Call Dialogue, widening your horizons.
Hey, this is Arlene, and we are back with Susan Price from Socialist Alliance. So when it comes to capitalism and neoliberalism in the 21st century, as a socialist, I'm sure you have a lot of criticism on this particular system and how it's threatening our humanity in this earth.
Yes, absolutely. It's the G20 just wrapped up in Brisbane over the last few days, and I haven't read the communique in detail, so I don't want to pretend to be an expert on everything that was said, but the main, headlines coming out of the G20 were that, basically GDP growth is going to lead the way in creating jobs and ensuring economic success across the globe. But, when you actually unpack that idea, the idea that 2.1% growth or continuous growth is not going to come without its cost to both the planet and humanity, then I think you start to realise the danger that this kind of neoliberal agenda actually poses to humanity and the planet in the 21st century. I think the other, growing competition between major powers, economic powers around the globe, is now, leading to situations where we've got new Cold Wars and potentially new hot wars developing between countries, and countries such as China being seen as a threat by the United States, countries like Australia even behaving like mini imperialist powers in the Asia-Pacific region. And, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, the TPPA, is just one example of, the drive by the major advanced capitalist and imperialist powers to sign or forge agreements with other nations that are basically going to benefit their own corporate class and their own national economies, but at the expense of smaller economies in
But
the
the
region.
funny thing about TPPA, if I may interject, similar to RCEP, more and more countries are actually joining it from the initial formulation of these mega trades. In fact, they are seen as, if you are not part of it, you are not part of the cool gang.
Well, that's right. That's right. Even China wanted to join, but the conditions that the United States were imposing on them, which I don't know what they were in detail, but from what I understand, were such that they were really not able to sign on. But yeah, I think you're right. I mean, that's the thing with these trading blocs, is that they become a club, if you like, that protects certain interests. And if you're not part of that club, governments become concerned that they might miss out in some way on some benefits from being part of these trade agreements. But they really they have more of a nature of a sort of you're either sort of with us or you get no favourable status, which I guess for economies like Japan, for example, would have a big impact on their decision to become a part of it.
I mean, currently they are bogged down with news about their economy not performing as well as they wanted it to.
Yeah, and obviously the opening up new markets in the region, is seen by their business sector as being a key to turning that around. So, it's also a way of driving capitalist development in the region. That is, more capitalist-based economic development in the region. Against, I guess, alternatives. Like, for example, mutual aid-based, agreements between nations that aren't necessarily on the basis of private profit or corporate interests, for example. The likes of which we're seeing in continents like Latin America with the trading bloc that they've developed between nations there, which is based on mutual development and benefit, not on private corporate interests, as most of the TPPA. I mean, the thing is, in Australia, we don't even know the full details of the TPPA. In fact, the Australian public has been locked out of. Even the members of Parliament have been locked out of the discussions. The only parties that have actually been given access to lobby and to see details of the TPPA have been corporate interests. And I think that tells you something about the nature of a trade agreement like the TPPA.
I can't help but to see that in the current capitalist system, you cannot escape globalization. You cannot escape the fact that corporations are the major player in terms of trade and development. Take, for example, Southeast Asia. With the current formation of the ASEAN Economic Community, which will be materialized next year, where Malaysia will be the chairman, it seems like without cooperation, without the discussion on investment, business, and economy, countries within Southeast Asia seems to not be able to think of an alternative way to develop itself better. So at the end of the day, countries do need corporations, don't you think so?
Countries don't need corporations.
Countries do need corporations.
Well, I think the way things are going from my perspective is that the actual sovereignty of nations is being handed over to corporations. I mean, if you look at the TPPA and the possibilities that corporations can actually sue governments for imposing what they consider to be restrictions on trade, that really, it starts to tell you that, there's an interesting and quite horrifying dynamic going on here where, as the people who have elected our governments, for right or for wrong, for good or for bad, we should be the ones who are ideally controlling, what our governments do in terms of trade, in terms of, all aspects of economic and political life. But, a trade agreement like the TPPA actually usurps that democratic, the prospect of democratic control by people over governments, and actually hands over a huge amount of control to corporations, which are completely unaccountable to the community, unaccountable to us as voters, have absolutely no democratic basis to them, and allowing them to run our economies, basically, and to dictate our foreign policy, our trade policy, and sadly also our aid policy, which is a really big problem in Australia, for example, because now, we're a relatively rich country, and yet, now the policy is that we won't give aid to another country unless it has direct benefit to the Australian capitalist class and Australian corporations. And there's fundamentally something wrong with that picture.
I see. I would like to know, if you give a lot of example of Venezuela, but do you think Venezuela has the kind of economic model, a socialist economic model that other socialists can from other countries can aspire to?
No, I wouldn't say it has, because really there's a process is still unfolding there. So Venezuela is still really in the main a capitalist economy. But what the government there has been able to do, which has actually meant the improvement to people's lives on a daily basis, reduced poverty, increased housing, increased literacy, eradicated illiteracy, has been because through this new system that they're developing, Bolivarian socialism, and the means by which people can actually get involved in decision making in that country, means that the government has been able to use a lot of the wealth that's been generated from particularly their petrochemical or oil sector, and then to direct that rather than going to the hands of private corporations, to funding the rollout of massive social programs. So it's really, it has been a process of slowly, if you like, allowing the public sector, the sector that's closest to the control of people, to start to deliver basic goods and services, housing, education, to more and more people in that society. So in that sense, from a political and social point of view, it does provide a very important example today, but the economic struggle is still really being fought there. There's still a local ruling class. There's still international economic interests that have an impact in Venezuela. It still exists in the global economy, but but slowly they are, I guess, they're actually managing to slowly, take control over their sovereignty.
But at the same time, I'm not trying to be pessimistic, but a lot of the countries, they are criticizing Venezuela's economy for having a really high inflation rate at around more than 60%.
Sorry, could you repeat that? It just went. It went like.
So a lot of countries have been criticizing Venezuela's economy for having one of the highest inflation rate at a number of more than 60%. Yes.
No, inflation has been a big problem in Venezuela, but you need to actually look behind. See, there those sorts of statistics to actually look at what's going on for people on the ground. So while one of the biggest causes actually of that high inflation rate has been the hoarding of goods that's been going on in the country, and this has been a major problem that the government there has been trying to tackle for a while now, has been it's basically part of a campaign to undermine the gains of the process in Venezuela by not releasing goods for sale basically in the market, so creating artificial shortages of goods, and that has actually contributed a great deal to the inflation rate.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to countries that a lot of the global world usually would aspire to, are countries within the Scandinavian region which have successfully married socialism and capitalism in a way where they can have one of the best quality of living standard in the world, but at the same time still having a capitalist platform for their nation's GDP to grow. Do you think perhaps pragmatism, by having both a balance of socialism and capitalism would be the way forward?
Well, I actually lived in Scandinavia a while ago, and it's true, like even in comparison to Australia, the level of social welfare there at the time that I was there was quite amazing, actually. And the, provision of housing and so on was quite amazing. But, even a country like Sweden, for example, has gone through a period of neoliberalism and a winding back of a lot of those social gains, and particularly when it joined the European Union, that was a major struggle that actually happened, was people being against joining the EU because they felt that would endanger a lot of the social gains that had been won in Sweden over the decades. I think we've had a similar situation in Australia, as I mentioned before, and there's certainly have been a lot of, I think in the era prior to neoliberalism, there was the possibility for countries like Sweden, the rest of Scandinavia, even Australia, to deliver high standards of living and universal health care, free education, and so on. But really, the reality today in the neoliberal age is that all of those gains are under threat. And in countries, of course, that have got that are wealthy countries, of course, it's become a question of priorities, of governments deciding where they're going to allocate their spending. Is it going to be on social programs, social welfare, education, hospitals and so on, or is it going to be on driving growth in the private sector as a means to grow the economy? And in Australia today, that's the struggle we're in the middle of. Is a fight between the community and the government about those priorities, about how much taxation, how progressive should our taxation be? Should corporations pay their fair share of tax? What's the cost of giving tax breaks? What has the cost been of giving tax breaks to the wealthy and to corporations over the last 3 decades been in Australia? And the reality is that cost has been that there's been less money available to actually spend on social programs, but also that the government of the day have made very conscious decisions based on their own priority on, if you like, creating small government to focusing on taking money out of social programs, but yet propping up, if you like, corporations through subsidies, which is happening in Australia today, massive subsidies to big business and to particularly the resources and fossil fuel industries at the expense of social programs. So, I think at the end of the day, it's difficult to imagine that that the dynamics of neoliberalism and the idea of maintaining a high standard of living for a population in a country like Australia are not contradictory. Because I think today there's a massive contradiction there, a massive conflict, and it's going to take basically people pressuring and building the kind of movement that's needed to actually turn that around, to change the focus away from the corporate subsidisation to a progressive taxation system and to providing for the needs of people. And that's certainly that's something worth fighting for, even within the context of a capitalist economic system. But today I think, as I've said before, the big threat from neoliberalism in the 21st century is the threat to the survival of our ecology, our environment, and global warming. And that is not going to be solved within the confines of a market-based capitalist system.
Yeah.
And I think that adds an extra pressure and urgency that we need to build the kind of society where, profits are not, where the pursuit of profit is not the driving force in our society.
Yeah. Anyway, we are towards the end of our discussion today. Thank you very much for sharing your view.